Moed Katan Daf discusses the halachas of nidoi, that's excommunication. The Gemara will explain there are two types of nidoi. There are two different situations in which a person would be excommunicated. One is if he refuses to listen to the court order, and the court will then issue a ruling against him. That could take the form of a mild nidoi, which is what we call nidoi. It's an excommunication that lasts either for 7 days or for 30 days, as the Gemara will discuss. And then they can get stricter, and they can be what's called a cherem, or a chrama, and that's a more intense form. Now, those two can also be applied by a Talmud Chacham in the situation where somebody insults or is disrespectful to a Talmud Chacham. He can issue it himself. Doesn't need the court for that. There's also a third level, which is lighter than those two, that a Talmud Chacham can issue, and that's called Nazifa. So for someone who's rude to a Talmud Chacham, the lowest level is Nazifa. That's if he's scolded by the Talmud Chacham, then he has to sit at home and he has to behave in a humbled manner. It doesn't have to keep the other halachos. That could last for 1 day or 7 days, depending where you are. And then you have the middle level, which is nidoi, and the higher level, which is cherem. Again, now the Gemara will first give the halachos of nidoi, the various different steps that are involved in creating the nidoi for the court, where the court determines that someone needs a nidoi, other methods that are included within it to force a person to accept the ruling of the court. After that, the Gemara will discuss the nidoi of a Talmud Chacham, when a Talmud Chacham is appropriate for him to make a nidoi, who does the nidoi apply to if a Talmud Chacham creates one, and the Gemara will bring a number of incidents in which a Talmud Chacham put somebody in nidoi, and the Gemara will discuss them at length. Okay, so the Gemara begins discussing how we know that a court can issue a nidoi. So first thing, the Gemara says, is the court has to invite the person to come to court. You can't issue a nidui against someone unless you first called him to court. What's the source for that? So Gemara says that comes from Moshe inviting Dasan and Aviram to a case against Aaron and himself. At least Aaron specifically, because they claimed that they wanted the leadership over Aaron. So where do you see that? So the Gemara brings the pasuk. It says, "Vayishlach Moshe likro ledasan u le'aviram b'nei Eliyav vayomru lo na'aleh." So Moshe called them, and they refused to come. Now, how do you know that you can send a messenger? You don't have to go yourself. So it says again, "Vayishlach," you send the shliach of the Beis Din to call them. Now, how do you know that you have to mention who the case is against? So it says, Ata v'heim v'Aaron, you and them and the entire group that's involved will all face off against Aaron. Now, they also have to be called to appear in front of a Gavar Rabbah, in front of a great judge. Just like over there, Moshe called him and said, you will appear before Hashem. You also have to set a time for the case, for him to appear, like it says, Machar. He said to him, you have to appear tomorrow. Veyomer Moshe al Korach Ata v'chal adascha hayu l'fnei Hashem Ata v'heim v'Aaron Machar. All of you have to appear tomorrow. Now, you give him a second time. If he misses the first one, you give a second one before you take any action against him. That comes from a pasuk in Yirmiyah discussing Paroi, that the Navi had said that Nebuchadnezzar was going to attack him, and he gave Paro 2 chances to do tshuva. And there it says, Karu Sham Paro Melech Mitzrayim Shon Hevir HaMoed. So Sham, the drasha is, Sham is like the word Shamsa, which means an excommunication, and we called a Shamsa on Parai after he missed the time. Hevir HaMoed, after he missed the time. Rashi says that means the second time. Besides for the first time, there was the second time, and he missed that. That is when you actually invoke the excommunication. Now, says the Gemara further, if the person that you're trying to call to din is rude and he insults the shliach of the Beis Din, he should come back and report it, and it's not Lashon Hara. Like in the case of Dasan v'Aviram, they said, Ha'eni hanashim ahem tenakir, if you will poke out their eyes, they won't come. Obviously, if they said that and the Torah reports it, Moshe heard it, and the shliach had reported that back to him. And therefore, you do say that. Now, how do you know that there is an actual excommunication? So then we go to the war that Barak held against Sisera, and there it says that he put in Cherem somebody who refused to join, refused to help. And it says in the pasuk there, Oru Meroz. Meroz is cursed. That's the language of excommunication. Amar Malach Hashem. The Malach of Hashem said that's a reference to Barak himself. Oru, he's cursed twice. Yoshveha, those who sit around him. Ki lo yivo le'ezras Hashem, because he didn't come to help Hashem. U'le'ezras Hashem b'giborim. So the Gemara says we learn a lot of things from this incident. First of all, the Gemara says you learn that you have to say the name of the person who's issuing the decree of excommunication, like he said here, Omar Malach Hashem. Now, it can also get more intense, we see from here. There's a cherem, that's the next step we take, because like it said, Orur, that's a language of cherem, that's intensifying the Orur that was originally said against Meroz. Now, you can also make it more intense and say that nobody's allowed to be within 4 amos of him. No one's allowed to sit, drink, or eat near him. Like it says, Yoshveha, he applied it to all those who sit around him. We also see from here that you have to spell out the exact reason. In your decree, where you decree the excommunication, you have to say what his sin is, what did he do wrong. Because over here he spelled out, and he said, Ki lo bo le'ezras Hashem. He did not come to help out Klal Yisrael, as it were, not really helping Hashem. Now, Gemara just adds that in this incident, the decree was made with 400 shofros. 400, they blew the shofar 400 kolos as part of announcing this decree. Now, the Gemara says, who was Meroz? The Gemara says 2 versions. Either was a great leader, someone who was very widely respected, who could have brought a lot of people with him, but he didn't join the war. Second approach is that it's actually a star. It's the star which is the mazel of Sisera, and there was a war, as it were, in the stars, like the pasuk says, the stars went to war, they actually fought with Sisera, and therefore Barak put Sisera's personal star, or the star of his into Cherem. Okay. Now, the Gemara goes further. The next step we'll do is we'll actually declare the man's possessions ownerless. We'll take his possessions away from him. And that's like it says in another discussion of a cherem which we find in Sefer Ezra. There, when Klal Yisrael returned from the exile, many of them married Nachrios, and Ezra put out decrees to stop it and to break it up. So there he said, anyone who doesn't show up to a special announcement that we're calling everyone to come, his possessions will be confiscated. So there we see that we can actually confiscate his possessions. Now, how do you know that you take further steps, which is that we yell at him, we curse him, we hit him, we pull out his hair, all these things? So there in context it says that as well. It says, I'll fight with them, I'll curse them, I'll hit them, I'll pull out the hair, and I'll make them swear against Hashem. These are all steps that we take specifically. Now, next thing we'll do is we'll actually tie them. We'll tie their hands and feet, and then we'll tie them to a stick, to a wall, and we'll do something called hardafa. The Gemara will explain hardafa in a minute. So how do you know that you tie them up? Because over there, the next, in Ezra further, it says, V'chol di loy lehevi oved dasa di alach v'dasa di malka asapra dina lehevi mis'abed minei hein limais hein l'shreishi hein la'anash nichsen v'la'esurin. So there we see 3 things that were done: limais, shreishi, and esurin. So esurin means tying them up. Now, what's shreishi? The Gemara says that means hardafa. The Gemara says, okay, great. What's hardafa? The Gemara answers that hardafa is that they take steps right away. As soon as it happens, you right away go straight to a cherem. The procedure is then the cherem takes effect for 30 days, and you then renew it for another 30 days. And if the person's still not cooperating, then you go on to the step of hachrama. Meaning first you do nidui, and then you do what's actually called hachrama. Cherem we use as a general word, but hachrama refers to the stricter level. So you do 30 days of nidui, another 30 days of nidui, and only then do you go on to hachrama. Now, the Gemara just says, before you do the hasrama, before you do the original nidui, you actually first have to warn him. So you do a Monday, Thursday, Monday, you warn him on those 3 days, and then you can actually go into the nidui. Now, The Gemara says that's all true for a court. That's when the nidoi is imposed by the court because he has not accepted the ruling. If, however, he's being put into chayrim because he was mevazal talmid chachamim, he degraded scholars, then it goes into effect right away, and you do it right away. There's no warning involved. Now the Gemara brings a story. The Gemara says that there was a slaughterer, a butcher, who degraded Rav Tavi bar Masna, and Abaye and Rava got together and put him into chayrim. Now the guy went right away and he apologized to Rav Tavi, and Abaye and Rava wanted to take the chayrim off, but they said, hold on a second, it hasn't been 30 days, and we know that a chayrim has to be a minimum of 30 days. So they weren't sure what to do. On the one hand, they wanted to take it off, but it wasn't 30 days. On the other hand, to leave it on was a problem because the Chachamim needed the butcher shop. It was a very stressful situation that they didn't have access to this butcher. So they went and asked Rav Idi bar Ovin, do you know the halach in this case? So he said, Rav Tachlifa said, the toot made him in chayrim, and the toot can release him. Toot meaning the shofar blowing that you use to announce the chayrim, release him again. And there's no problem, you don't have to have a minimum of 30 days. But they asked him, that's only a court-ordered chayrim. But here we're talking about somebody who was degrading to a Talmid Chacham. That doesn't apply. There you have to have a minimum of 30 days. Now, the Gemara says you can learn from here an interesting halacha. I had a question. If 3 people put somebody into chayrim, do you have to wait for those 3 to take him out, or can another 3 people take him out? Like maybe the guy can go find 3 other people, make a Beis Din out of them, and then they could release the chayrim from the first guys. So here you see that Abaye said that we have to take him out. Abaye and Rava were busy trying to figure out whether they should take this person out of chayrim or not. They took responsibility for it because since they put him into chayrim, they had to be the ones that take them out. There's nobody else who would be able to handle it instead of them. So now the Gemara says this is actually a question. The Talmid Chachamim discussed elsewhere, can other people release the chayrim made by the originals, or does it have to be the originals themselves? And the Gemara wanted to say we could bring a proof from a brisa. The brisa says that when a Talmud puts somebody in chayrim, that chayrim applies to everybody except his Rebbe. His Rebbe does not have to listen to the chayrim of the Talmud. When a Rebbe puts someone in chayrim, the Talmud, it does have to abide by the rules of that chayrim. Now, if somebody's put in chayrim by his own city where he lives, that applies to every city, but other cities don't have a right to put somebody in chayrim in his own city, meaning the city that he lives in does not have to follow the rules of chayrim imposed by a different city necessarily. Now, as far as a nasi, if a nasi puts someone in chayrim, all of Klal Yisrael have to abide by that. If Klal Yisrael puts someone in chayrim, the nasi doesn't have to abide by any of that, the leader. So now, the Gemara says, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, that if one of the Talmidim in a group that puts someone in chayrim, if he dies, so actually his chayrim will never come off, because he's not around to take the chayrim off. So the Gemara says, you see from there 3 halachos. You see, first of all, that a Talmud could put somebody into chayrim, because he called him a Talmud. Second of all, you see that when a chayrim is removed, is actually each person takes off his own part of the chayrim. It's not one chayrim put on by 3 and taken off by 3. Each person has a third of it. And you can take it off separately. You don't have to be in the room all together, make the Beis Din. Each person put on a third. You can remove a third. Now you also see that other people can't take off somebody else's chayrim. Otherwise, the fact that this guy died is not a problem. Somebody else could take that chayrim off. So you see from here that that's the halacha, just like Abaye had said. Now the Gemara says that Ameimar disagrees, and Ameimar says if 3 people put on a chayrim, a different group of 3 could take that chayrim off. So Rav Ashi asked Ameimar, we just saw this brisa. Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says that one of the Talmidim made the chayrim, then it's going to stay if the guy died, if he's not around anymore, because he can't remove it. So Gemara says no, he didn't mean it's going to stay forever. It just means that the chayrim has to be removed individually, and if he died, somebody else can remove his chayrim. But he's coming to show that each chayrim has to, each person has to individually remove his chayrim, because it's 3 parts to the chayrim that was made by 3 people together. Okay. Now the Gemara goes on to how long is a nidui, how long is a chayrim, and how long is a nizifa. So the Gemara says that a nidui is 30 days, and a nizifa goes for 7 days. Nizifa again is that lower level where somebody is scolded by a Talmid Chacham. So Gemara says, now there's no proof that a Nazifa goes for 7 days, but there is an indication when Miriam spoke against Moshe. So it says, "V'avia yorok yorak b'fanel l'tikolim shavaz yamim." Somebody is scolded by her father, she would be embarrassed for 7 days, and that indicates that this period of scolding will continue for 7 days. Now, the Gemara comments that our nidoi also goes only for 7 days. In Eretz Yisrael, Nazifa goes for 7 days, and Nidui goes for 30 days. In Bavel, Nidui goes for 7 days, like the Nazifa of Eretz Yisrael. So now the Gemara has a kasha: is it true that the Nazifa of Eretz Yisrael goes only for 7 days, but we have indications that it actually goes for 30 days? The Gemara brings a case where Rav Shimon bar Rebbe, Rav Shimon the son of Rebbe, was learning together with Bar Kapar, and they came to a hard sugya. And Bar Kapar said, and Rav Shimon said, we need to ask Rebbe what the pshat is of here, meaning we need to ask his father. Bar Kapar said, Rebbe, who's Rebbe? There is no Rebbe, meaning Rebbe's not going to have what to say on this. Now, Rav Shimon then mentioned that to his father incidentally. Rashi says he wasn't trying to tell Lashon Hara on him, it was discussed agav. When Rebbe heard about that, he was upset. And the next time Bar Kapar came to visit him, and he had come, Rashi says, because Rebbe had Yisurin, he was very sick, and Bar Kapar came to visit him, he said to him, I don't recognize you, I never saw you before, I don't know who you are. Meaning to say that I don't want you to be here, and he was showing he was upset with him. So then Bar Kapar went, and he put himself into Nazifa for 30 days. So you see that Nazifa is 30 days, not actually 7 days. Now there's another incident that happened, that Rebbe made a decree that no one should teach Torah in the street, and that was from the pasuk in Shir. Shir is a source where it says Chamuke Yerechayich Kemoy Chaloim. It compares Torah to Yerechayim, to the thighs. Now Rashi explains that the end of the pasuk is Ma'aseh Yedei Aman, the hand of the worker, handy work of the worker. That's a reference to Torah, and it calls it Chamuke Yerechayich, like Yerechayim. So just like the thighs are hidden, Torah study should also be hidden. So that was Rebbe's decree, and some people went and they broke that decree. The Gemara says that Reb Chia went and he taught his two nephews in the street, and that's Rav and Rabba Bar Bachana. They were both nephews of Reb Chia, and he went and he learned with them in the street. And Rebbe heard about this and he was upset. And the next time Reb Chia appeared before him, he called him Iya instead of Chia. So Mepharshim explained that Reb Chia couldn't say his name Chia, he himself had to say Iya, and therefore he was making fun of the way he spoke. And anyway, he said to him, Iya, who's calling you outside? Meaning to say, go out of here, I don't want you to be here. And from that, Reb Chia understood that he was upset at him, and he went and he put himself in the status of Nazifa for 30 days. So again, you see that Nazifa runs 30 days long. And the Gemara just finishes the story. The Gemara says that after 30 days, Rebbe sent him a message to say that you could come out, you could come visit me again. And then he sent him another message to say, disregard the first message, you still have to stay in. Why did he do that? The Gemara explains, first he held that Mixasam Kakule, part of the day counts as a whole day, so the beginning of the 30th day was enough. Then he said, no, the 30th day has to be completed, and that's why he sent to cancel the first day. Now, what actually happened was that Rebbe Chia got the first messenger and not the second messenger, so he came quickly right away to Rebbe, and Rebbe said, why did you come? He said, what do you mean? You sent me a message that I could come. He said, I sent you another message that you can't come. He said, well, I didn't get that one, I only got the first one. So based on that, Rebbe quoted the pasuk, Bertos Hashem Daki Ishgam Oivav Yashlam Itai, when Hashem is pleased with a person's ways, then his enemies will make peace with him. And that's what happened here. Hashem was pleased apparently with Chia, Rabbi Chia, and therefore even though Rebbe did not want to make peace with him, he ended up doing it accidentally. Now, the Gemara just explains what their argument was. Rebbe had said that you can't learn in the street because of Chamuke Yerechayich. So Rabbi Chia had a different pasuk, one in Mishlei, where he said Chachmos b'chutz Torona, and he understood Chachmos to mean wisdom, meaning Torah study, and it says b'chutz Torona, should sing in the streets. So therefore he said you should learn in the street. So Rebbe said to that, you didn't learn it correctly, and if you learned, you didn't review, and if you review, you didn't review a third time, and if you reviewed a third time, you never learned the right pshat the first time. It doesn't mean you should go learn in the streets. It means that if somebody learns inside, the Torah will announce and make him famous outside. The Torah is going to do the announcement. You don't have to do it yourself. You just need to learn. Okay, now the Gemara asks, how could Rabbi Chia, how does Rebbe avoid a pasuk in Yeshaya that says Lo Mereish Baseiser Dibarti, where Hashem says, I didn't give the Torah in secret, in hiding. That seems to indicate that Torah should be learned out loud, in public. So the Gemara says that's referring to Yumi de Kala. That's referring to a drasha, to the rabbim. It's not referring to small groups or when a person is learning on his own. So now the Gemara says, what is Rabbi Chi going to do with Chamuke Yirei Chayich? That again, it was Rebbe's source to indicate that you should not learn in public because it should be like Yirei Chayim. So where it says that, it refers to tzedakah and gemilas chasedim. Over there where it says Maisi Dei Omer, it's not referring to Torah, it's referring to tzedakah and chesed. You should do that quietly. Anyway, what we see from here is that Nazifa was 30 days. And you had said earlier that Nazifa was 7 days. So how do you fit the two? So the Gemara says it's different because that's the Nazifa of a Nasi. Rebbe was the Nasi, and his Nazifa is therefore stronger, and it goes for 30 days. Now, we do Nidoi for 7 days. So that's a regular Nidoi that in Eretz Yisrael they do for... that in Eretz Yisrael they do Nazifa for 7 days. We do Nidoi for 7 days. So how long is our Nazifa? The Gemara says our Nazifa is only 1 day. Now the Gemara brings a few incidents to show this. The Gemara says that Shmuel and Mar Ukva had a Rebbe Talmud relationship. Shmuel was greater in Torah than Mar Ukva, and therefore when they were learning on their own, Mar Ukva would sit 4 amos from Rebbe in order to show that Rebbe was the greater one. However, when they sat in court, Mar Ukva was the Av Beis Din, and therefore when Shmuel was there, Shmuel was just one of the Dayanim, even though he was greater, and Shmuel would therefore sit 4 amos away from Mar Ukva to show Derech Eretz to him as the Rebbe. But Mar Ukva wanted that Shmuel's opinion should be heard, and therefore Mar Ukva had his seat carved out so that it was lower than Shmuel's seat, and that way there would be attention given to Shmuel. Now, the Gemara says that Mar Ukva, because he was really the one who was the lesser Talmud Chacham, used to walk Shmuel home every day at the end of the discussion. He would walk him home to his house. So one day, Mar Ukva, and he would walk slightly behind him, as the Talmud should. One day, Mar Ukva was busy thinking about what case they had discussed, and he didn't pay attention. He didn't walk behind Shmuel, and Shmuel was actually following him. And Mar Ukva didn't release him. So when they got to Mar Ukva's house, Shmuel said, you're going to let me go home? It's not enough that you made me walk and follow you the whole way. Now you're not going to release me here. I like to go home. And Mar Ukva understood that he had made a mistake, and Shmuel was upset with him. And he went and he put himself into Nazifa for 1 day. Now the story happened that there was a woman who was sitting on the road, and she had her feet splayed out in front of her, and she had a pile of mixed kernels of barley and their shells. She had shelled the barley, but it was mixed together, and she was throwing them up in the air to winnow it so that the shells should be blown away. And a Talmud Chacham, a Talmud, came by, and he wanted to walk by, and she didn't move her legs out of the way, and he had to walk around. So he said, look how chutzpahdik this woman is. Kama chatzifa hahi itza. Now she was afraid that she was now put into Nazifa, so she went and appeared before Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman said, did he say that you're in a Nazifa? Did he say that you're in Chayrim? And she said, no, he didn't say that. And he said, well, then you don't have to worry about any actual Chayrim, but just go put yourself in Nazifa for 1 day. Now the Gemara brings another incident that happened. The Gemara says that Zutra bar Tuvia was teaching Parshias in front of Rav Yehuda. And when they came to the pasuk in Shmuel, it says, Ve'ela divrei David ha'achronim, these are the last words of David. So he said, these are the last words, then what are the first words? Now the phrase divrei implies that it's a nevuah, but where else do you see that there's a word divrei applying to something said by David? You don't find divrei anywhere. So how could this be the last divrei if there's no first divrei? This was the question that Zutra bar Tuvia asked Rav Yehuda. Now Rav Yehuda didn't answer. So Zutra thought that he didn't hear him, so he said his question again. But Rav Yehuda had really not answered because he understood the question, but he didn't have an answer. So when he heard the question again, he thought he was making fun of him. So he said, what do you think? Anybody doesn't know to explain this pasuk is not a great person. He's not a Talmid Chacham. So Ezra understood then that he had offended him, and he went and he put himself into Nazifa for, again, one day. So now the Gemara is going to continue and explain this sugya and a lot of other things that are related. So the Gemara says, what exactly is the pshat? Where is the first divrei David? The Gemara says it's actually the pasuk earlier, where it says, Vayedaber David Lashem is divrei hashira hazais. B'yem hitzel Hashem oisim mekaf kol oyev mekaf shol. And David said the divrei of this shira on the day that Hashem saved him from his enemies and from Shaul. So there you have a divrei related to David. Now on the subject here of a shira that David said, I'm being saved from Shaul, the Gemara says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, you're saying shira against Shaul. You should just know, you seem to be rejoicing about the downfall of Shaul. You should just understand that Shaul would have been greater than you had he had your mazel. The fact that you're greater than him is because of your mazel. But his tzidkus, his righteousness, is actually greater than you. And that's the meaning of the pasuk Tehillim, Shigoyin LeDavid. It's a mistake for David, Ashashar LaHashem al divrei Kush ben Yemini, that he's saying a shira to Hashem on the words of Kush ben Yemini. Now who's Kush ben Yemini? Kush generally means an Ethiopian with Ethiopian colored skin. So there was no Kushi that hung out with David that he had any involvement with. So when it says Ben Yemini usually refers to Shaul. So this Kush Ben Yemini actually refers to Shaul. Why is it called a Kush? Where it says because his deeds were great, that it made him stand out, just like the skin of a Kushi makes him stand out if he's amongst white people. So the phrase Kushi is a compliment to show that he was outstanding. And the Gemara shows other incidents where Kushi is used as a compliment. The Gemara says that Moshe's wife is called Tzipora. She wasn't a Kushi. She's called that way because she stood out with her actions as a Kushi stands out. Similarly, you find that Tzidkiyahu HaMelech is called Vayishma Even Melech HaKushi. That's referring to Tzidkiyahu HaMelech. Again, he was not a Kushi, but his deeds stood out like a Kushi stands out. Similar thing about Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael is called Halokiv and Kushim Atem Li, because her actions again stand out as a Kushi does. Okay, now the Gemara goes on to discuss the rest of the incident with David. So Gemara says, Rav Shmuel ben Nachmani said in the name of Rav Yonasan, what is the meaning of Eile Divrei David Achronim Neum David ben Yishai Unom Hagevar Hukam Ol? What does Hukam Ol means? Gemara says Hukam Ol means he set up the Ol, the yoke of Tshuva. He established the concept of Tshuva for the world by doing Tshuva on his Maisa. Okay, the Gemara discusses more of those psukim. The Gemara says, David said, "Okay, Yisrael li diber tzor Yisrael Moshe ba'adam tzaddik Moshe yiras alekim." So what does that mean? So the Gemara says it means to say as follows: David said, "Okay, Yisrael, Elai diber tzor Yisrael." That Hashem spoke to me, and what did he say? Ani Moshe ba'adam, I rule over people, but who rules over me? As it were, Kaviyachal, who rules over Hashem. So he said a tzaddik does, because a tzaddik can actually take off decrees that I make. Like Hashem makes a decree, and a tzaddik is mispal, and that causes the decree to go off. Next, the psukim say, Ele Shemos HaGiborim Asher LeDavid. These are the names of the strong men, the generals that worked with David. And then it lists Yoshev, Basheves, and the Tach Kamoni. Where it says those aren't names. So what does this mean? And where it says it means these are the Maisim Tovim. These are the good actions of David. Doesn't mean the strong men. And what are they? So Yoshev Basheves means that when he sat in yeshiva, he didn't sit on pillows or cushions or chairs. He sat on the floor. As long as his Rebbe Ira HaYeiri was around, David sat on the floor like all the Talmidim did. And when Ira HaYeiri passed away, David himself became the Magachir, but he continued to sit on the floor. And the Chachamim said to him, "Why don't you sit on cushions as the Rebbe should?" So he said, "No, I'm going to make myself even with everyone else," and he sat on the floor. So that's Yoshev Bashevetz. What's Tach Kimoni? So the Gemara says that Hashem said, since you made yourself low and you humbled yourself, you will Tehei Kimoni. You're going to be like me because I make Gzeira and you can cancel my Gzeiros. Like it says in the rest of that Pasuk, Rosh HaShalishim, you'll be the head of the three, meaning you'll be the leader of the Avos. When they all walk in Gan Eden together, David will be in the front. He'll be the first one. Okay. Further, the pasuk says, "Hu adino ha'etzni." The Gemara says that means when he was sitting and learning, he would be ma'adin atzmo kitalas. He would wrap himself up like a worm out of humility. He would have his feet and his hands on the same level on the floor, sitting on the floor, working hard to understand what he learned. Next thing the pasuk says is al shmonas me'eschal b'pam achas, that David used to fire an arrow and kill 800 people in one shot. And the Gemara says that he was upset there was only 800 and not 1,000, like the pasuk in Devarim says, Echa yirdof echad elef, that when it was in the right level, one person could get 1,000 in one fell swoop, but he was only able to get 800. And Abaskol came out and told him it's because of the sin with Uriah Chiti, with Bathsheba, that you lost those extra 200.